great to be with all of you, and it's great to be here with the Center for Communication, because this organization does outstanding work in helping create the next generations of media talent and leadership. I love the title of tonight's presentation, New Day for Local News, because as a reporter at CNN covering the media, I'm often focused on the bad news, on the struggles of old-fashioned local newsrooms, of newspapers going out of print. But there's also another story. There's a much more optimistic story about growth and rejuvenation and regeneration in local news. And that is the story we're going to share tonight with our panelists. I apologize for my Zoom background. I just moved apartments. I said, I'm going to have an office. And my kids said, we're going to have a playroom. So that's why Peppa Pig and all that is behind me. I'm still trying to negotiate what my TV studio is going to look like. But that's the reality of the Zoom era. And I love knowing that, I can go live on around the world from home. And that's one of the aspects we're going to get into tonight as well, that new technology is creating new opportunities in local news, whether that's in television, digital, and even in some cases print. But I think we should start with all of our panelists going around talking about the title of the session, about this new day for local news, and basically start by hearing from everybody for a minute about why. Why is there optimism? Why is there hope on the horizon? Why is it a new day for local news? And so why don't we do that, starting with you, Jen, running WNYC and Gothamist. What are the reasons for optimism in this business right now?
Well, I am incredibly excited to be here talking about local news because it is now part of my blood. I was fortunate enough to be able to start Gothamist about 20 years ago, and I've seen it grow from a hobby into an actual business, one that was shut down and one that's now been resurrected as part of a nonprofit that is associated with NPR. And so I've had to bootstrap, and I understand a lot of the challenges that happen in terms of like running a business, a media business, and not knowing anything about it, to now being part of a larger organization that is growing. And, it's just really exciting that we're adding more reporters and editors to our newsroom so we can give our listeners and our readers the information that they need about their communities.
Well, what a great example of merging radio and digital and creating new content that way. Sheryl, let's go to you next. Cheryl Thompson-Morton. When I say new day for local news, how does that resonate with you?
Yeah, I think one of the most exciting things that came out of this period of COVID is that it made us realize the importance of local information. And I know for many of our news organizations, both Black media organizations and just the broader industry, when COVID hit, it really made us realize there's a lot of information that we need that is local, that cannot be given to us from wonderful places like CNN and the like. We have to go to our local outlets. And I think it really made people realize the value that local news provides that national news just can't compare to in the same way. And so that's why I think there's a lot of optimism in the space, is that there's this realization from our society of the importance of local news and why it matters.
Laura, you must have experienced that firsthand in your market in New Mexico. When the pandemic began, people needed your station in a different way.
That's absolutely true, Brian. And I'm going to echo something that Sheryl said. For so long, we've heard about the death knell of local news, television news. It's gone. It's old fashioned. But when you've got something like COVID, you have something like a lot of the social justice protests. Local news has never been more important. And while people watch national, they want to know what's going on in their own communities. It's the big stories, but it's also the small stories. What's going on in your school board that directly affects your children. Anything that affects your taxes, those things are really important as well. The other thing that I think is new and exciting is that we are seeing a new diversity of people and communities and thought. And I love that. And as we're looking at the new reporters and new producers that are coming through our newsroom and who are applying for our jobs, I love this. They are fearless. There is a sense of fearlessness that I haven't seen before. And I love that. And they are the very ones who, when we say why, they say, well, why not? And so it opens the door, I think, for more innovation.
That's great. I love hearing that, the fearlessness. And Nick, what about you? Nick, I've been wanting to interview you actually about this, about Axios. You all are doing something really interesting by expanding what began in Washington in lots of local markets. So tell us what you're working on.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the broader optimization of like the optimism around local news. I think it's just an outgrowth of so much exciting stuff that's happening in startup medias, like nationally. Like the last 5-10 years, if you look at national media, particularly in digital, has just been incredible. The number of companies that have started, the number of innovative new platforms that have been built, that have hired like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of journalists. And I think just in the past maybe 2 years, the natural progression of that has gone to local news. You look at the Capital B in Atlanta, you look at the Texas Tribune or the 19th that have been digging in to more local types of issues. And I think that's the naturation of also at Axios. We started out with a theory, a specific style of writing, our smart brevity type of journalism, that we can deliver information that gets folks smarter, faster, in a real mobile friendly way, testing it out on national politics with our background. But then the response to that has been so great. We want to push the boundaries. Like, how much farther can we do that? And that's what we started last year in 4 cities and in partnership with the Charlotte Agenda, which we bought now, Axios Charlotte, to see, will this model work in local as well? And it's going gangbusters. Like, I've got a tab open on my screen right here next to my Zoom where I've got to hire 40 reporters in the next 100 days, and then probably another 50 in the second half of the year. And I think that's just a great sense of optimism that we're seeing, that I think a lot of other folks are seeing, about the opportunities that exist if you invest in local news, build really strong businesses that'll really be valuable for readers.
Let's help our listeners and viewers understand what these jobs are, because I feel like we're going to go through in a couple of minutes, talk about all of our backgrounds and how we got into these jobs. For me, I graduated college 15 years ago, and if I wanted to be on TV, I would try to get a local TV job, and if not TV, a newspaper job. But now there's all these different businesses and options. So you, Nick, Axios, it's all digital. It's newsletters and short stories. Is that essentially the model, the business model?
I mean, that's the start, the basic unit of Axios as our business is our daily newsletters. And the thing I joke about with folks that we hire on to write daily newsletters is, be careful, there are a lot of days. But once we get the handle of that daily cadence, our newsletter teams, we hire a minimum of 2 people in every city. Once we get the handle of that, then I really try and push them to do more ambitious journalism. We started doing deep dives and newsletter takeovers, really doing investigative work. In DC, just this week, the city council passed legislations prompted by an Axios investigation into how the mayor was using WhatsApp and other secret chat programs to communicate with officials. So you find you can really make an impact there. But what we're really just looking for, and I think probably everyone would agree, we're just looking for just reporters, right? There's no secret sauce to this. If you're a good reporter and on your phone and you're trying to figure out what's new and explain it to your community, I mean, that's the recipe for success. And when we go into community, that's what we're looking for, both senior, like experienced folks with years of experience. And then we typically, when we get someone on these 2-person teams, one old person, one person very young, and try and pair those together to have a mentorship relationship there so they can learn the craft at the hand of someone who really knows it.
But I love that point about the core value, what new journalists can bring is be hungry reporters. Be curious, go find stories.
Yep. What I love to say is, like, I've never, like, newsrooms are chronically understaffed. I've never worked at a place that's closed on Christmas. That's the life of journalism. And so the folks that we have in our newsroom, especially the younger folks who just have that hunger and desire, I want to go out and figure out what's happening in this community. And I want to tell somebody something they don't know.
Yeah.
That kind of ambition, I think, leads to great success.
So newsletters is an example of local news coverage that didn't exist decades ago. Lori, what about you? You know, you're running a television station, but I have a feeling the people you hire, they're not just working on the 6 o'clock news.
No, that's correct. They're working all hours because obviously we're on for many shows, but we're also multi-platform. So as well as television, we're also digital. So that's the price of admission. I mean, it's both. It's not either or, it's and to be proficient in how you do good storytelling on television and on digital. And sometimes they're 2 different ways. It's not just taking a television story and slapping it on digital. There are nuances and differences because the audiences are different and they expect different things as well.
Great to have the options, though.
Yep.
So let's go around and share. And people are going to have very specific questions about what jobs are out there and how to pursue them. But I think it's always helpful to hear your all's trajectories, how you ended up where you are today. How did you get your start in journalism? So Sheryl, why don't you start us off and we'll go around. How did you get your start in this field and how did you get to where you are today?
Yeah, it's interesting because I always like to say I am not a journalist. I work in the journalism world, but I am not a journalist. I'm someone who came from the business side of working in nonprofits and things like that, but then eventually started working in journalism nonprofits, so really thinking about the convergence of fundraising and giving grants to support the projects of journalists, which eventually led me to my role here of running the Black Media Initiative, which is really just about supporting Black media through thinking about how to be financially sustainable and increase visibility. So my trajectory is a bit different than most. It's a business background coming in from that side as opposed to the editorial side of the business.
But if we don't have the business folks, then we don't have newsrooms. We don't have anyone to fund the journalism. What's the best advice you were given about your career that you think really ended up being true and paying off?
Oh my goodness, I've gotten so much good advice, but I think if I have one, it would be from my mother. My mom always said, do everything in excellence and do everything to the best of your ability. And also just always listen, like start by listening and then lean into that, trying to solve the need of what the person who's talking to you actually needs from you. So really trying to understand what is it that they want and they need and how can you provide that to them. That has proven to be invaluable for me in my career.
All right, Jen, you're up. How did you get your start in journalism and how did you get to Gothamist and WNYC?
I too have a really untraditional background. I had worked in advertising. I thought I would just, take a path like that. But I realized that I had no idea who my city council member was. And I knew I wanted to live in New York City, but didn't know that much about it. So back in 2002, a new technology came out called Blogger, where we could post comments and information for our friends. We didn't have to learn HTML to post things. And it was basically a CMS platform. And my college friend and I decided we would share information that we'd want each other and our friends to know. And we turned a hobby where we would tell each other about interesting New York City stories, expanding from what bars opened and where we might want to eat or what movie we'd want to see to, did you realize that this legislation that Mayor Bloomberg is proposing will affect whether or not there's smoking in restaurants? And that was an issue that I was really interested in because I hated coming out of a bar smelling like smoke. And so it actually turned out that other young people who weren't as necessarily tuned in to getting subscriptions to newspapers or as tuned in to like watching the news at certain times wanted this information too. So we were able to turn a hobby into a business, and we started sites in New York, Chicago, DC, San Francisco, and LA, and then actually in other cities like Toronto. There's still Torontoist and a Londonist, and we made it our own business for 14 years on our own. I learned journalism and being a business owner all from scratch. I was doing the HR and payroll at first, and then we finally got a company to outsource it. And we were completely profitable for our whole run. And we decided to sell our company in 2017 and merge with another New York City local site called DNA Info. 2017 was a year of a lot of resistance and other movements. And the owner decided to shut it down after a union drive. But luckily, because of this desire for the kind of local news Gothamist was, creating and the community being thirsty for it, a few donors gathered together and got the assets back from the owner and donated them to WNYC. And then WNYC then distributed them to other public radio outlets like WAMU in DC and KPCC in LA. And so we were able to bring Gothamist back in 2018. So we are now part of the public radio or the public media ecosystem. And that was actually a really important lesson because obviously, Nick just mentioned the Texas Tribune, that has a nonprofit model. And so, having a more diverse, business like behind you gives you a little bit more flexibility. So when the pandemic hit, with sponsorship going down, we had some grants coming in to be able to come to serve people this way. So I learned journalism by just getting in there and being curious and not taking no for an answer.
You're making me think of that old saying that necessity is the mother of invention. So that as, local news is contracted in other areas, you got to go out there and find solutions and invent new ways to do it, whether that's funding, mergers, all of these new ways to come up with the financial resources for local news, right?
Absolutely. It's always about thinking about the opportunity. And what I think other people have said is this something that you want to tell your friend or neighbor about? And, thinking about that at like a very core level and wanting to get involved with that.
I also love what you said about blogging, which was brand new for you and me in 2002. And now, that we sound like, fuddy-duddies in some way. Like there's a version of that now, right? In 2022, whether you're on TikTok or YouTube or Instagram or some other platform I haven't heard of yet, there's an opportunity for a brand new person to enter into this world and, come up with something new based on a new platform.
That's the most exciting thing. There are all these new forms of storytelling that are effective in different ways. And as Lori was saying, like people can't tell the same story in the same fashion on the platforms. You can't take a radio script and put it on a website. You have to sort of think about your audience and the best, most compelling way to get them to understand that. It could be a 30-second, Instagram video, or it could be, like a 5-minute TV segment. So it really depends on, also having reporters and editors and all these different colleagues who are constantly like challenging each other and reminding them, like, who are you speaking to at this moment?
Right. So Lori and Nick, let's hear your career stories as well. Lori, would you like to go first? How did you end up running the station there?
Well, I have to say I'm probably the most traditional, old-fashioned way of how I got here in many ways. So I started, I'll go back. I'll try not to go too far back, but in college, internship. I was in Los Angeles, KTLA, and I was working on the assignment desk as an intern while I was going to USC. So from an internship, I actually ended up as a reporter. I went to grad school in Northwestern, Medill, and then I went to Peoria. So I started in these small markets as a reporter. So Peoria, Mobile, and then Charlotte. And then interestingly, people came in and bought our station. Long story short, found myself without a job. So I kind of reinvented myself, decided to go behind the camera. So moved back to the San Francisco Bay Area. I was an overnight writer at KPIX there. Overnight writer, the nights and weekends. Then I produced the noon, the 5, the 6, the 11. I became an executive producer, managing editor. CBS bought a station in Sacramento. I became an assistant news director. Hearst recruited me and became a news director. I ran WISN in Milwaukee for 6 years, KCRA for 6 years in Sacramento. And then lo and behold, I was promoted to become a general manager here at our Hearst station in Albuquerque. So I started in news. I started in one room of the house, and now I'm kind of over the whole house, which I got to say, I dig it. I love it.
I feel like people listening to this who might wonder, what was it like to move so often? And is that normal in this business?
Yes, it is. And here's what's so interesting, Brian. So I'll do a lot of job fairs and I'll talk to a lot of students and I'll say, well, where do you want to do? And what I'll often hear is, well, I want to do such and such a job, but I want to live in New York. I want to live in Chicago. I want to live in LA. They don't want to live in small markets. And I understand that. But I have to say, I'm an advocate for, at least when you're younger, moving around, because you get a lot of hands-on experience no matter what you're doing. And so eventually you'll end up where you want to go. But I think the purpose of getting your first job in this business is to get your second job, because then when you get to that second job, then you catapult and you go up the ladder. So again, I'm I was the climber versus kind of going and staying in one place. I think as I've gotten older, I kind of like to settle down a little bit, but I didn't mind moving. I didn't mind moving around.
Yeah, that's awesome. Nick, what about you? You were most recently the editor-in-chief of Axios, and now you're the publisher. So where'd you get your start?
Yeah, I started out in the mailroom of the Washington Post. I wrote for the Georgetown Hoya, where I went to school, and I needed a job, and I didn't want to go be an investment banker, and I didn't have the grades to go to law school. And so my editor said, I can get you a job sorting mail. And I was like, that sounds awesome. And so that's what I did for the first 3 months, and then really just climbed my way, pitched story ideas, met with editors, spent a year answering phones during a campaign, during a presidential election. The Post was expanding their business coverage, got just an entry-level job. It let me get out on the town and do reporting on banking and finance. Had to do, for folks who know newspaper, had to do business agate, had to compile stock listings and business appointments on Fridays, but the rest of the week I got to do reporting. I think it speaks a lot to my favorite line ever, and it was in the video that's opened up this session. Just get a job, right? Like, I'd love to tell folks in college, don't talk about doing journalism, go do journalism, go take a job. Don't sit here and say like, well, I'll want my first job to be as a White House correspondent for CNN. It's like, that's not what your first job is going to be. Your first job is going to be answering phones. There's going to be, I sorted mail for 3 months, right? But like, it got me in the room. It got me to meet the people. It got me to learn from editors around me. And so I was at the Washington Post for 4 years. Then I moved to Bloomberg, where I covered Congress and politics and campaigns. I spent 2 years as a White House correspondent at Bloomberg, and then wanted to stretch my wings and try and become an editor and a manager. And I was a manager at Bloomberg, I think for 5 or 6 years, building teams there, very similar to the way I did at Axios. And then when I had been in the mailroom at the Washington Post as a kid, a young man named Mike Allen was just starting out also at the Washington Post as a junior political correspondent. And so when he left Politico, when he decided to leave Politico, he gave me a call and said, we're going to do something new. And I said, this sounds awesome. And that was a real opportunity to step another rung up on as a manager and really build a newsroom. I was employee number 5. And when I transitioned to publisher, I think the newsroom was about 150.
Wow. I think what we should do next, and Nick, you can start with this, is let's talk about the skills that you all look for now when you're hiring for local news jobs. Because Nick, you mentioned you have a tab open on your browser. You have dozens of jobs that need filling for Axios Local. So when you were looking at resumes, what are you looking for? So
there's 2, and I think and half of it probably won't be as useful for this audience. Like, we do go into communities and we try and hire people with a lot of experience, right? Folks who have 10, 15 years of experience. We've hired out of newswires, out of metropolitan dailies. We've hired out of television stations, NPR, people who know their way around the community and can really write with authority when we launch this newsletter. But then we love pairing them with younger reporters. And on that, it's really, and it sounds like, as a hiring manager, this sounds so self-serving, but it's just hustle and curiosity, right? Like, we start in Axios Local with 2 people covering a city, and you know what? We could barely do it if we had 100. And so people who are just incredibly passionate about this job, who incredibly want to work hard. I like to tell people, how did I get my job as a White House correspondent at Bloomberg? I spent a year volunteering for the Saturday shift. And so when they had an opening, they knew that I could do it. And so that was a great way to get in and becoming part of a regular covering the White House. And so I think that kind of energy, that kind of curiosity, you just have to love it, right? Like, I tell people, if you wanted to work 9 to 5 or something, there's plenty of other jobs. But like, this is news. It's so much more fun than that. And if you have that kind of passion, you'll realize that, like, a story is breaking, like, this is all I want to do right now. And I think that kind of passion and curiosity, just like when that jumps off in the Zoom interview, that's what we love.
Jen, how about you?
I am looking for a lot of the same things. I'm looking for people who are curious and who will demonstrate hustle. And, you know, when I speak to people, and this is just a little thing, I know that for some organizations, they don't want cover letters. I read every single cover letter. I sometimes skip the resume because if somebody writes a cover letter, they're able to communicate why they think they should be working at my organization. And so for me, I spend a lot of time reading every single cover letter to get a sense of, like, does this person have a sense of, you know, what we do, or do they have some ideas that I haven't heard before? Or it's like, oh, actually, I've been thinking about that same thing. So I am looking for people who have a lot of enthusiasm and will say like, you know what, if I see something weird happening on the street I walk on, I'm curious about it, I will try to find out. And that might mean, you know, for a reporter to say like, yes, I will go wake up at 2 a.m. to go and see what the police are doing in terms of like taking the homeless people out of the subway stations, and volunteering to do Saturday and Sunday work while it seems like a drudge. And it's also like very similar to working in a smaller market. There's so many opportunities because there are usually fewer people there and you can get your hands on anything. So it's about people who are willing to raise their hand and say like, I will do that. I really want the opportunity. And we are also looking for people with a lot of different skills. Like I would say, you know, 5 or 10 years ago, you're looking for people with a lot of, you know, very specific experience, but a lot of the tools that we use today, like being able to cut audio or video, people are now using in their everyday lives to communicate with their friends or having their own podcasts. And so there are sometimes people who are coming to us right out of college who have skills that no one in our newsroom has. And that's really appealing to bring in people who have different perspectives and can give us something new. So I would say, you know, be your own best advocate. I'm sure your mom and dad say that all the time, but really, you know, tell me why you're different and why you're also hungry to be at this place.
I love that point about what skills you know, new employees can bring that actually just add to the newsroom and help the newsroom. Because I think we probably all had a version of that in our careers where we were bringing new knowledge that the folks there didn't have. Lori, what do people get wrong in their resumes? That's the flip side of this conversation, which is like, what doesn't work? What doesn't appeal? What skills are you not looking for?
Well, I'll start with, I guess that's a great question, Brian.
You should do the positive first, though. Yeah.
I'll do the positive and then I'll do the negative. But the negative, actually, there's some pretty interesting stories. Some of the things that we've heard before. I think curiosity. I think someone who asks really good questions, really good writing. We're a visual medium, so I love the candidate who knows how to marry pictures and words together. That's visual. I think that's really important. I will also say that since I've been here, we've had 4 people who were straight out of school, and we look at their links, you know, we'll look at them. There was something about those 4. There were 2 producers and 2 reporters. They just jumped off the screen. They took chances in their storytelling. They told those stories a little bit different. They knew how to use sound. There was just something about them. One of them is in LA. She literally went from Albuquerque to LA. Another, we're lucky to have him for a year and he's going to go. And then we've had 2 producers who are going on to bigger markets. In terms of the negative, these sound so simple and obvious, but man, I see them. Dear, you spell my name wrong. No. You cut and pasted something from another to the, no. Factual problems, no. Form letter, no. Kind of to what Jen said, I'm looking for the imagination. And bonus points to you, gold star, gold star, gold star, if you have done homework on our market and our station. And you can start your letter with, I've been watching your newscast. Here's what I love. Here's what I would add. I'm like, oh, call you up because you've done your homework. And I think that's so important.
Sheryl, what would you add to that about the what works and what doesn't work when people are trying to break in?
You know, I think there have been so many good points raised. I think what Lori raised about really understanding the community that you're aiming to be a part of, I think that is critical, and centering the community and the user and your approach, not being so in love with whatever medium or whatever 10,000 word article that you want to write that you're not understanding, like, we're here to serve an audience, we're here to serve them well, and we're here to give them what they want, not necessarily what we want. And so I think that is really, really important. And I think if you're not doing your homework, to Lori's point, before you're talking to different organizations or before you're sending your cover letter, it shines through. It is so clear when you are just like sending a generic letter to everyone, when you're just like sending something to everyone, and there's nothing there's no reason why my organization is special to you in your application process, right? So we want to know, just as much as you want to be special to the organization, that we're special to you as well. We don't expect to be the only place you apply to, but there should be a reason you're applying to us. There should be some fit that you see there. And so I think as much as possible, making that case clear, and just advocating for yourself, like Jen said, being your best advocate, I think is really important.
And where do you encourage people, let's say, a college student, a college sophomore, junior, where should they be getting the skills now that they can try to impress employers with in a year or two?
I think there are so many organizations. Obviously, there are the organizations for journalists, especially journalists of color, like NABJ, AAJA, NAHJ, NAJA. Like, these organizations are providing a lot of skills and training to get you ready for the job market. I think there are also organizations that are trying to be on the cutting edge as well. Like the News Product Alliance, for example, is really trying to merge not just the traditional reporting techniques, but also thinking about audience development and understanding your user and what is the technology component, because all of these roles didn't exist 5 or 10 years ago, but now these are critical roles in the newsroom, understanding social media and those sorts of things. So I think really looking, like, this information is available. People want to share this information. That's one of the great things about the journalism industry, is people love sharing about their work and what's working, what's not. And so there are a lot of these organizations available to learn more and get more resources on it.
Yeah, definitely. And Nick, you said something related to this earlier, which is, there's not, people say they're an aspiring journalist. And I say, you're not an aspiring journalist. You either are one or you're not. And Nick, you said you always tell people, go out and get started. And that's the reality if you're in college, right? Go out, start, make a YouTube video, write a blog post, start a newsletter, do whatever it is. What tools do you point people to, Nick, that people should try to use to start? Like, what should students be doing?
Yeah, I'm too old to be able to tell college kids what are the cool tools to use. But when I look at resume, now I don't want to, I'm completely opposite of Jen. Like, I am throw out the cover letter straight to the resume kind of guy. I guess it takes all kinds. So everybody, kids, do both. You never know who you're going to get. But I do really look like, for younger journalists, like, have they demonstrated an interest in this already, right? Like, if you're applying and you haven't done any kind of journalism classes, or you haven't done any kind of school newspaper, you haven't tried to write for the school magazine, come on, it's a college, like, there's a million opportunities for that. So at least an opportunity to try to do that. And again, or at least you've created a blog, you've made your own Substack, you have a killer Twitter account, right? You don't talk about doing journalism, you do it, right? You take pen to paper. And tell people what's happening in the world. I think that's what we look for most. And I think you can see that kind of desire in the when I see it in the resumes. Like, have you tried already? Or did you just sort of decide on this because now classes are ending and you're like, oh, maybe I'll try journalism? No, like, you show your interest a little ahead of time.
Right. Now, and certainly, many do that. And they're out there and they're applying. Let's tell people why they've picked the right field. Like, let's tell people the fun, the joy of local news. Because again, I feel like people like me are part of the problem. Whenever I get to cover local news and I'm exploring what's happening in local, I'm talking about, some newspaper that's shutting down. And that's true. That is part of the story. Print newspapers are going to continue to fade away in some cases. But there's so much electricity and energy in this field. Well, let's share some of those stories. Jen, is there one that comes to mind for you about, when something really works well and you all are ahead on a story and readers and listeners in this case really benefit? Any examples like that you can share with us?
Yeah, a story that I think about a lot is, we take the subway every day to get to work or places, pre-pandemic. And there had been rumors that we heard, and we got really lucky. And it turned out that they were going to shut down the L train to repair it because all of what happened during Sandy damaged all of the tunnels. And we were able to report it out, and we broke the story. The MTA confirmed it. And it just showed that, we as sort of like an independent news organization could break this kind of news for people. As it turned out later, Governor Cuomo was like, that's crazy. We can't cut off this lifeline to so many businesses that need that transportation between Brooklyn and Manhattan. So he came up with another plan. But I think being a part of a story that not just affects the community, but is something that affected, some of our reporters, also got us really motivated and excited and invested in it. And as we're able to hire more and more people, you start to learn about other issues that are important to hopefully more communities, more parts of the city. What I'm always also looking for is like, you don't want to find the same kind of people in our newsroom. We want different people, different perspectives. And I would love to have like at least 5 people who could who at least live in every single borough of the city, if not like multiple people in different like sections of it. So we have like eyes and ears on the ground telling us these stories that we need to know. Something can, arise from just realizing like, wow, that it seems a little weird that there are police there. And it turns out the police are shutting down parks because they don't like, big groups of people who have been gathering there for the protests. And, being able to break stories like that have impact for maybe a certain community, but, sort of signal an issue that's larger in terms of how the police are treating, different types of people, is really exciting. And you can sort of see the impacts. And what's also exciting, I think, about being part of an organization that has multiple platforms is one of our hosts, Brian Lair, on the radio would have this weekly show with the mayor. And so we get to feed questions directly to the mayor every week. And then we can call him out and fact check him, with our own teams of producers and reporters. And then we're able to, further the story and further the work. So it's a really vibrant area. And it's, it can be a small issue or a big issue.
And you use the word lifeline, which really resonates with me. My wife is one of your rivals. She's on local news in New York. She's on New York One. And I was always thinking that during the start of the pandemic, local TV, shows like hers were a lifeline. They were a way to help people get through the crisis. And it's hopefully it'll never be a pandemic again. But whenever there's really great news or really terrible news in the world, people want that local news lifeline. They need that local news lifeline in order to feel connected to their community.
Something that was also just passed around is that in the Ukraine, people are now just turning to their radio because they don't necessarily have other ways, to get their information. So it's also exciting to be, to have multiple platforms and different ways to communicate with people, whether it's social or the radio or TV or web.
Yeah, definitely. Lori, what about you? What's a great example for you in Albuquerque and Santa Fe of why local news matters in a unique way?
A couple of things. And I think it's true of Albuquerque, but it's also been true, Brian, of other communities where I've worked. And I know this may sound a little bit cliched, but when you talk about what's exciting and what's important, I would say, first of all, breaking news. And breaking news is important. And I don't mean just the average car crash or shooting or whatever. I mean, we cover those things. But every once in a while, you are at the scene of a really big story. And I would say for Albuquerque, the biggest one probably recently was the shooting on the movie set with Alec Baldwin. And we got a tip about that. We got actually a call to our newsroom into our newsroom from somebody on the set to our investigative reporter who said, you need to get down here. You need to get down here fast. And as she's driving, we're finding out information. And so you don't get stories like that every day, but I would say breaking news, we're visual. There's nothing that beats that. I think that's important and exciting. I think when we break stories, when we do some really good digging, we get good information and we break stories, that's exciting. And a lot of times those don't just fall into your lap. Those are a lot of times that happens after a lot of digging and research and, getting really good sources. So I think breaking stories is great. And then the third, I think too, and now I'm kind of on the soapbox here, but it's holding the powerful accountable. We're the watchdogs. We're the ones that are watching out for how your money is spent, the decisions that are made in your local communities. And sometimes those aren't that sexy, but those are important stories. And those are the things that, that local news does so well. And the sad part is now that we have fewer journalists because newsrooms are shutting down, we have fewer of those people that are those reporters who are in those spots. We're the ones watching out for you. We're the voice of the viewer and the user. And so it's not always sexy, but boy, is it important. And that, to me, when we do stories like that, that's a good day. That's a good day.
I think important is sexy, but what do I know?
Me too.
Yeah. Nick, what is the impact of, so I mentioned local newspapers, right? And we're here talking about digital and radio and television, all these opportunities for growth. But the decline of newspapers, what does that mean for folks like you, Nick, who are creating new models and new businesses? I suppose on one level, it means there's new people to hire.
Yeah.
But, can we replace what's been lost in print, or should we not even be trying?
We don't have a choice, right? Like there's a lot of conversations about local news that lament the state of things and want us to go back to the way it was. And then my either answer to that is, I'm sorry, we invented the internet, right? And like I have it, here's my smartphone. Like I can't uninvent that and go back to this idea where the basic unit of information delivery was printing something on a piece of paper the night before and loading it in a truck and driving it to your house and throwing it at your front door. Sorry, I love papers, but it's over now. And so I think just confronting that very realistically, and the faster that traditional media organizations and that newspapers say that, it's different. We need to understand and begin to evolve. And I think some papers are doing a tremendous job of that. About understanding how we need to substitute subscriptions for advertising. We need to think about new ways of delivering information separate from that piece of that 2-pound block of paper that I throw on your doorstep. I think that's very valuable and important. Like, and I'm heartened by the rise of startups like mine and others to provide that sense of competition, right? Like if I'm knocking on your door trying to hire your reporters, you're probably going to think a lot more about what kind of journalism you're doing and how you're keeping those reporters like inside your organization doing local journalism. So I am like, on that sense, I'm a huge optimist of this, about just a sense of energy surrounding this, the opportunities for journalists who want to be innovative and try new things. Like there's never been a better time.
And we know the audience wants it and needs it. They both want the information.
Exactly.
You need the information. We're going to go to questions in just a moment, Q&A. But first, Sheryl, we've seen some really interesting expose is the wrong word. We've seen several big newspapers in the country, in Philadelphia and Baltimore and Kansas City, revisit their histories, basically causing racial inequities and supporting racist structures in their communities. There's been a reckoning for some of these papers. And at the same time, there's a awareness that local news needs to represent and look like the country it serves. Are local outlets making progress? Are you seeing progress on the ground?
I mean, I think we definitely are seeing progress, right? In the post George Floyd murder, I think all of us have really taken more account of being more representative, not just in terms of the people in the room, but also the stories we're telling, the way that we are addressing power dynamics and things like that. It's caused much more conversation about that. And so I think there is progress. There's still a long way to go, obviously, because we were starting from a place that was so dismal. So the progress is we definitely need to continue that pace. And I think the reckonings and some of the papers trying to say, this is what we've done. We know we've done harm. And we're sorry is a good place to start. Obviously, the proof is in the pudding of actually being embedded in those communities and continuing that work for the long term, right? We're not going to redress harms that in some cases happened over the course of 100 years, in a year or two of saying we're sorry and we're going to hire more folks. This requires deep investment for the long term. But I think, there's a possibility to get there.
And
How
Brian,
can people be part of it? Oh, sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Just to
Oh,
piggyback
please.
off of something that Sheryl said too, that I think is really, really important. I think we have become more aware of, we've talked a lot today about the storytellers, but we've got to have people at the heads of the table. We've got to have more managers. We've got to have more people in charge, because you can hire all of the people in the world that are diverse. But if they get into those newsrooms and they aren't given the permission and they aren't given the support to tell those stories, that's important. So we need more people of color who are the producers and who are the news directors, who are the general managers, who are the publishers, and not that, I can't stress that enough, that that is so important, that our storytellers have to look like the community, but the decision makers have to look like them as well.
With that, let's go to Q&A. Let's get everybody involved who's watching and listening right now.
All right. Hi. So I am currently a freelance writer. I mostly do a lot of pop culture writing, but I have wanted to break into like the local news industry and in the journalism industry. That's always kind of been my biggest passion. And I was wondering, like, what were you, what in terms of local news, like, what are you looking for in terms of transitioning from like sort of a pop culture freelance writing world to going into the local news world?
And Anna, tell us your school.
I recently graduated, but I'm from Drew University.
Excellent. And do you have a specific person you want to field that to, or to the whole crew?
Anybody in particular? Yeah.
Anybody want to answer first?
I can go.
Sure.
So I'm always looking, and I think Lori also mentioned this, like, you know, it's kind of like, you've been covering a lot of this, but you know what you haven't been covering? Or, you know, saying you cover a lot of that, but here's an angle that you've missed. So I actually think for a while, a lot of the reporters at Gothamist were generalists. So they would go between culture as well as hard news, or, you know, any sort of topic that, you know, might resonate with our readers or listeners. And I think it's just sort of having a sense of something that is like a germ of a story. Like, is this something that you would want to know more about? Is this something that is an issue that affects, you know, how you live your life in this community? Is it something that you'd want to tell your friend about? Like, for instance, this is like a funny story, but one night I walked out and it smelled like maple syrup. And it turned out other people in New York City smelled the same thing.
Oh, yeah, what was that? What was that, Jen?
So it was a running joke for many years. We would create this map. And then one day, and this is before Gothamist was like really, you know, considered a real press organization, I got an email from the mayor's office inviting me to a press conference where Mayor Bloomberg decided to unveil the mystery of the smell. And it was actually a factory across the river in New Jersey. And one of the products they made was just, depending on the wind pattern, you would sort of see like certain parts of the city would get a lot of these calls to 311 saying it smells like maple syrup, but it came this like joke on 30 Rock. It was just sort of this weird, you know, thing that you know about. And like, I would love it if somebody could tell me what the next maple syrup smell is, like something I didn't realize I needed to know.
There's always some weird smell in New York City. Who else has thoughts for Anna?
One of the things I was going to mention maybe for Anna is be prepared to answer the question. You've been doing pop culture reporting and you've had that interest for so long. Why local news? Like, what is it that is interesting you now about doing a different kind of local news? Be able to tell that story, tell your story. Don't just walk in and say, because I wanna, you know, say, why is it? Why do you want to make that transition? And if you use any of the things that you've heard today, our speakers have had some excellent advice and examples, but be able to tell that story. Here's why I want to transition. Here's what I'm passionate about. Here's what I care about. That's always attractive.
Love it. Anna, thank you so much. Let's bring in John. John's our next questioner. John, tell us what school you're from, where you're from.
Thanks so much. My name is John Roach, and I'm a professor at Western Connecticut State. My question is, do you think, in your experiences speaking with recent grads, do you think there's anything that we as journalism educators might be overlooking? You know, preferably something, you know, we're not talking about how to write a strong lead or, you know, FOIA request. Is there something that you see as a recurring thing we might be overlooking in our classes, in our courses, or in our conversations between courses.
Great. Sheryl, do you want to take that first? Your initiative is affiliated with the Newmark School, CUNY. Do you want to go first on that?
Sure. I mean, I think, some of the things that are important, and I think this came up in the conversation, is that there are so many skills that are now needed to be a journalist, right? It is no longer just about the reporting, like I can't just file my story and I'm done, right? I have to promote my story. I need to, check my analytics and figure out how do I use that to approach future stories? How do I use that data? And it's often missing in journalism education because, the educational system, we move slow, right? We move much more slowly than the industry is moving. And so I think preparing folks, and, obviously Gen Z is very much so understands the role of social media and disseminating information and all of that. But I think it's important to understand the life cycle, to understand, right, I'm going to be getting data on my stories and be judged and evaluated based on how my story is doing with this data. How do I evaluate this, right? How do I know what to do with data? How am I not afraid of it and just like, that's stupid, my story is great? I think that's really important, and we don't talk about it. And then young journalists I've seen go into newsrooms and this is happening and they're like, wait, what? Like, no one told me that this was going to be like what happened. I thought I just wrote a great story and that was it. So I just think that's really valuable for our students. And that's not something that I think a lot of us are preparing them for.
I like hearing that. I'm teaching a class at NYU this semester, so I'm taking some advice here for me also. Nick, I see you want to.
Yeah, I got to jump out of my seat and echo that. Like, I believe that so strongly. If I think about how the youngest journalists at Axios work, they're writing the headline, they're picking the visual, they're working with data viz and illustrators to illustrate that story. They're going to write that story with their editor. They're going to write the SEO headline. They're going to write the social headline. They're going to talk to the social desk about tweeting that. It's so much different than, I think back to when I started at the Post. It was like, all I had to do was write 800 words in AP style and I was done. And then the copy desk took it, but like every single step of the way. And the ones who are really just superstars are the ones who learn and understand why that SEO headline was good, or why this just regular headline is good, or like, did I frame this in a way that it's best for readers? And then the triple bonus of all that is if they write a great story, the podcast team is going to call them, and now they got to do the podcast. And if that story is big, we're going to pitch them on TV. And so if you can speak coherently on an audio broadcast, if you have a television presence, that's just now you're a quadruple threat. And I think that full package is what we most look forward to, and I think is the most important thing to teach.
Love it. Jen, Lori, anything to add?
I think having as many skills in your pocket is definitely a key. I mean, I do look at resumes, and so I'm interested to see also, like, do you know how to use a camera? Like, do you shoot film? Can you take videos? Can you cut your own stuff? That's all really important. And I think, understanding things like SEO, or how well a story does, or different ways to make something pop, or like, having an understanding of like, oh my God, why did that story, why is that at the top of a most read list, on a different website? Understanding the things that, can give something more legs and more longevity. Because if you're spending all this time working on your story or your newsletter or your podcast, you want as many people to, hear it, or you want it to have some sort of impact. So, sort of like thinking outside of yourself and your world of like writing the story, being able to think about like, how can I get people excited and wanting to read the next word, or hearing the next moment, or seeing the next like photo that I'm sharing?
Definitely.
And then to echo kind of what we've heard, the adaptability important. I think flexibility is important, understanding the metrics. This is probably a little bit more esoteric. I don't know how you teach it, but I think you can challenge it. And that is critical thinking. To be a really good thinker, to ask really good questions. Not just to say, oh, okay, but drill down and be the good journalist and challenge all that you hear and that you see.
Thank you for that. And thank you, John. Let's bring in, I mentioned NYU. Yusha is next. She's from NYU.
Hi, yeah, my name's Usha Sukai. I wanted to know, what role does unpaid and independent experience, such as like a blog, especially one that's not necessarily nonpartisan, play in a young journalist's chances of getting hired?
I can jump.
Yeah, go for it, Nick.
It doesn't hurt. Like sticking with our philosophy of don't talk about doing journalism, do journalism. Like that definitely demonstrates the desire and the hope for it. And my college paper didn't pay me a penny, and it was a great experience. And so I think definitely using just like the most important thing is like there are so many opportunities often in school to avail yourself of that, or in the community where your school is. And so I think any demonstration of a desire to do that is like 100%. It's a plus.
If I could just jump in on that, I just would add to that. I think it's really, I agree with everything Nick said. I would just note anything that you may show to employers, make sure it's really high quality. So like, sometimes you can show someone something and it brings you down, not up. I'm not saying necessarily that has anything to do with your blog, but I've seen blogs like that where it's brought down the applicant as opposed to up. So just make sure everything you're showing actually shows your work in the best light. I think that's really important to just think about as well.
Let's go to Kenya next.
Hello, everyone. So I'm coming from, well, I live in DC. I attended Columbia University, and I'm currently a fact check reporter for the Daily Caller. And so my question is for Lori specifically. Anyone, of course, can join in, but I have experience interviewing. I was a features reporter for Hearst magazines, and I had an opportunity to speak to Oprah, to Andre D. Shields, to Dorothy Gilliam. And so I'm coming from that background, and now I'm a fact check reporter, but ideally I want to be a broadcast TV journalist, right? And so I'm trying to figure out how do I break into the industry when I have such a big background in features and interviewing and being on TV, being on magazines, but I don't necessarily have that local news experience, like working in an actual news station in front of a camera. I have a reel, but it's not like it's from school. So I'm just been trying to figure out how do I make that transition?
No, that's a great question. Well, I think a plus, you're fact checking. So that means that you are good with facts, you know how to dig. So I think that's good. I think the reality, Kenya, is that when you said we are going to want to know how you look and sound on television. That's just, we're visual. We're going to want to do that. So, if you've made a reel, take a look at it. If you feel like it's dated, if you feel like it's, we're going to want to see you in action in some way, shape, or form. And so, I've met students who have been in kind of your same position. They've had internships where they've gone to shoot a story and they've tried to get somebody to help shoot them. Bottom line, I don't care how you do it, but we need to see what you look and sound like. Like, you can be wonderful, you can have all kinds of great experience, but we have to know how you look and sound. So find someone who can help you shoot something of yourself. Take a story, just take a couple of stories, rewrite them, get some sound bites, and put yourself in the story visually so that we can see that. So at least we can see how you look and sound. And then the last thing I would say is there are a lot of people in your position. You're in a big market. And, I don't know if you're going to want to hear this, but if you go to a smaller market, even a smaller market in an area where there's a big city, then at least you can get some of that background. They will be more willing to give you chances because you're just starting out. But again, if you have a mentor, if you reach out to me on LinkedIn or something, let me help you figure out how you can get yourself a current reel, because that's going to be really important.
Let's go to Aria next.
Hi, I'm also a journalism student at NYU. Thank you all so much for talking to us. I've personally learned a lot from this session. So my question is, what is your advice for pitching? Where do you go to discover stories? How do we find those local news?
I can take that. So I would just say, know the place that you are pitching, know the kinds of stories that they have covered. Have they covered this issue in the past? And see if there's something that interests you, or, as I was saying before, like, is there a question that we haven't asked? Or it's also like getting out to other neighborhoods and seeing what's there, or like, is there something amazing about this one? It can even be a restaurant, like you talk to the restaurant owner and this person has an amazing story that should be told. And, or like you start to see all of those 15-minute grocery internet startups, like the places like Getter. What are they doing to the neighborhood? What are the stories that you're kind of curious about yourself and that aren't being told out there? I think like also reading all of the possible news sources in that community, because then you have a sense of like the stories that have been covered already. Because what editors want to see are things that they haven't heard before. And so if you're just going to give the umpteenth story about a certain subject, then that is less interesting. But then if you're like, this is something, there's some areas that are just not as covered as much, or we should just be devoting more time to. So some freelance pitches that we've been taking a lot of lately have been about the environment and how that's affecting, communities on a more local level. So, I would also like venture out. Everyone sometimes wants to do the sexy stuff that's like, we're covering the mayor, or it's going to be about, this like high profile case. But sometimes it's the undercovered stuff and you having a really good pitch around that will get somebody's attention.
I love the way you said that every editor wants to hear something new. That's what makes them all, that's the commonality. What can you bring them they haven't heard before? That's really smart. Samuel, let's see if you are on here.
Hi, I'm a recent graduate from SUNY Stony Brook School of Communications and Journalism. My question is specific for Jen Chung and Lori Waldon. For because they work in specific markets now, when you're working in a market, just like coming in day one, maybe not day one, but if you do move, where's the first place to just try to search out knowledgeable and reliable sources for local news?
I think, it's a little old fashioned. That's a great question, by the way, Samuel. That's a great question. I think try it, there be officially people, but here's what I would do. Just get to know the people that run the town. Just get to know the people kind of twofold. So, you talk to the police department, you talk to the, hospitals, just talk to those and ask them really good questions. Like, what are unusual things? What are the stories we are not telling? Like if you go to the traditional people and you ask them, what are the stories that the media is missing? What is it that we're not telling? And hear what they say. When you go and get a bagel, when you go and get your coffee or whatever, talk to the people that are around you and just ask them basic questions. That's how stories start, but really get to know a community. A professor told me something once that I thought was kind of corny, but it really is true. When you're driving places, a lot of times we drive with the windows rolled up. Roll the windows down and listen to sights and sounds. Listen to what's around you. Notice things as you're driving places. Why is that the way it is? Why is that? Just start asking yourself questions, and you just dive in wherever you can. There's no right or wrong answer, but it starts, I think, with asking questions. And then I've always loved it when people ask, what are we missing? And then just kind of go from there.
Jen?
Yeah, I would add that like being on the ground and getting to know, business owners, people who live there, like going to community board meetings, like it can sound like a slog, but they can be fascinating troves of information. And you're going to meet people who care enough to show up to the community board. So obviously that's only one part, but that can be the start of you finding out what the story is. And then you can get in touch with the local elected official. Then you can, sort of like go to that neighborhood and talk to more people there and see, is that an issue? The trash pickup isn't happening. And so, it's a lot of like getting the anecdotal information, doing the examination for yourself, and just talking to a few more people. And, trying to move into like developing your sources. You just have to sort of like, again, raise your hand and say like, I will cover that day of event. I will cover that breaking news thing. I will cover the most boring press opportunity possible, because I want to get in there and start like meeting people. And, sometimes like other reporters, camera people, they're like talking about other things that they wish they could be covering or something that they've missed. So you get lots of great gossip. And so just keep your ears totally open. As Lori just said, like ask those questions.
Excellent.
Brian, could I hop in on that really quickly?
Yeah, please. I love it.
So one thing when I worked at a newsroom, a local newsroom, one thing a journalist did that I thought was really smart was she walked around the city. Like she would just choose a neighborhood and just walk around and just like start talking to people, but also just like look around, because sometimes the stories are literally, you see them, you just have to be there. And sometimes we miss them like on the train going from one neighborhood to another, and we just zip right past. But sometimes just being there and walking, she found so many stories, so many sources, and built such a community where now it's like, she's a part of Philly and she's not from Philly at all. So, that was really interesting to hear from her as well. And I think it's good advice.
Gosh, that reminds me of as a community. I live out in New Jersey, and there's been this old abandoned Walmart there for years. And I've always wondered, like, what are all the cars doing in the parking lot of that old Walmart? There's nothing there anymore. It turns out it's this giant marijuana like dispensary. Like they're growing cannabis, and it's now become a big story in town. But it required one reporter to wonder why are there all these cars in this empty, deserted parking lot? And you start to ask those questions, and you figure out, oh, there's a new business here. People are getting rich here, and you end up with a really good story. All right, sorry for the tangent. Let's bring in Raymond. Raymond, what's your question? Go ahead and unmute and tell us where you're from.
Hi, I'm Ray. I'm a senior in University of Pittsburgh, and my question really just it didn't really seem like that good of a question. I kind of wanted to come up with a new one, but it was just mainly just about my major. I'm a social science major. I'm not a journalism major, but yet I'm fascinated by all this, right? Like, by news. More than anything, it was always politics. But I mean, what is often more news than politics, right? You can't really separate them. The whole thing fascinates me, right? But again, my major is social science, and this is would mainly seem to be conducive to journalism. So I guess just the other leg of my question was just kind of like, how much does GPA, how much of an impact can that have, in lieu of major, right? If you say, if any of you were looking at, say a Ray Rogerson, and you were maybe, looking for journalism, and you see social science, but then you see I'm a senior with a 3.6 GPA. How much does that kind of subvert, what exactly the major was?
I can go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead, Lori.
Thanks. Then I'll keep it short. I would say the major doesn't matter, Raymond. It really doesn't. We have hired art majors. We have hired math majors. We have hired science majors. It really doesn't matter. In fact, in many ways, I kind of like it when we hire people who are not journalism majors. I'm telling you, because the lens by which they look at many things is very different. I was a poli-sci major. I love me some politics. So I love that. That's great. I got my master's in journalism, but the major, just do what you love. Do what what we're looking for is not just what you studied for 4 years, but what you are now. How do you write? What kind of storyteller are you? What kind of critical thinker? And that transcends all majors, I think.
I echo that 100%. Like to be honest, if I'm looking at a resume and it says social science major instead of journalism, like that's kind of more interesting, because this person might be able to do stories that an English major like myself would never even figure out. And some of the coolest folks that we've hired like echoing Lori again, like have not had traditional English or politics or journalism majors, or like who studied languages, which is awesome, or studied science, makes them such a much more powerful journalist, because they'll know these things like outside of just the conduct of journalism, that I think they'll make their story so much better.
I second, I third that. A couple more minutes for questions. Let's go to Emma.
Hey everyone, I'm a CUNY J School graduate from the class of 2019, so shout out to Sheryl. It's an amazing school, and I'm just gonna say, if you have questions about how to get started in journalism, they give me a big boost. I now work as a writing associate producer at MSNBC on the show American Voices, and my background is in print journalism though. So I'm curious, as journalists and people who support journalists who work with different media, how do you establish editorial standards across these different formats? And what kind of flexibility do you expect from your reporters?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I think the biggest thing is, what is the kernel of the story and what is the best way to tell it? And, I think if you have a strong enough story, it will be able to translate to lots of different mediums. And obviously in terms of like editorial standards, we just want to make sure that like all of the most essential facts are presented in like each one of those places. But, obviously, for the radio, we're able to add in a lot of like, great ambient sound and, try to create more of a mood and take you to a place. And then in the print version, we're doing a lot of that with the words, with the descriptions of the place, describing those sounds. So actually just sort of like add on to finding people who are outside of like a journalism major. A lot of the people that we've had coming in have been like visual artists or even like theater majors, because they know how to tell stories in different ways and think about ways to like, make that pop. So I think what's exciting right now is that if you are excited about consuming media across different platforms, you have a sense of the information that you'd like to get out of like that podcast or that Instagram video or that, TV segment that you're going to watch, and hit those points.
Let's go to Julianne for our final question. No pressure, Julianne. Final question. Tell us where you're from.
Yeah, no pressure at all. Thanks for that. My name's Julianne. I'm actually from Indianapolis. I'm a senior at the University of Indianapolis, but I actually am also an MMJ at actually the ABC affiliate in South Bend, Indiana on weekends. So my question kind of stemmed from Lori's kind of background about being a climber. And I definitely see myself being a climber. I'm currently in the 98 market at South Bend, but I want to move up. So what would be your main advice for a new reporter who definitely sees himself moving up in markets?
Love it. You're already doing it. Yeah.
You did. Brian, that's exactly what I was going to say. First of all, congratulations. You're in the business. So it's just a matter of where you want to go. So you said you're an MMJ, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So MMJ. So really just, it's very basic. I mean, take the best work that you have, build a really strong reel. Make sure that where you are right now, because you're looking for your next job, right? So I always said the purpose, is this your first job out of school?
Yeah, it is.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I said earlier, the purpose of your first job is to get your second job. So kind of hold the mirror up a little bit right now. Ask yourself, where am I really strong? Where am I really challenged? What do I need to get strong on? And get some feedback. And then start doing some of those things. And if you're liking where you are, then go for it. And I think, be judicious in who you apply to and where you go. The small, unfortunately, a lot of companies now are being gobbled up by others. So do your homework, look for a station where they're doing excellent journalism, that they treat their employees well. But here, Julianne, is what I think is really, really important. Wherever you go and you interview them as hard as they interview you. And I think one of the things you need to ask them is you've got to ask them, this is critical, what kind of feedback do you give? Because so many times when we're interviewing candidates, the biggest lament is no one gives me feedback. So when you're looking for your job, make sure that you're going to like who's going to be supervising you. How are they going to give you feedback? How are they going to tell you when you're succeeding and when you need to do, when you need to to work on some things that you're challenged on. But you should like them as much as they like you. We need MMJs. I mean, I'm being presumptuous here. I don't think I'm gonna have a problem finding a job. Just put your your best stories forward, and go for it.
With that perfect way for us to wrap, I want to go around to each panelist for one sentence, the one big message you want people to take away. Nick, why don't you go first?
I'll come back to what I said at the beginning. Don't talk about doing journalism. Do journalism. It's awesome.
Perfect. Cheryl, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think just local journalism really matters, and local journalism needs your voice, needs your perspective, needs your energy. So don't be afraid to get started. To Nick's point, just go out there and do it. There's a role for you in it.
Jen, what's your message?
I would say know your audience, whether you're applying to somebody or you're telling someone like, this is a story we need to, talking to an editor, or you want to, convey your story in whatever medium you do. Know what you're talking about and figure out how you can best do that.
And Lori?
A little bit different. Be authentic, find your voice, speak up. And I would also say this is a fabulous occupation. It is a fabulous job, and we need your voices now more than ever. We really, really do.
My mentor David Carr used to say, yeah, journalism, it beats working. And that's really how I feel. Not every day is perfect, and it can be a challenge, but it really beats working. And local news matters most of all. It is what people care about most, because it's actually affecting them. So thank you to our panelists today. Thank you to all the attendees. Thank you for participating, and especially for our questioners for keeping this conversation going and asking sharp questions. That's one of the other through lines here this evening, is it's all about the questions and in the curiosity that you have.